Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining our Trailblazer webinar today. My name is Cheryl O'Connor. I'm CEO and co-founder of Income Conductor, an innovative and award-winning retirement income planning technology. And joining me today as co-host is Mark Butler, a consultant to wealth management and wealth tech firms, and also founder of Wealth Management GPT. Good afternoon, Mark.
Good afternoon, Cheryl. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. Looking forward to our discussion.
Yeah, I'm excited about our guest today. So just to set the stage for those of you attending for the first time to our Trailblazer webinar series, our series highlights the people in our industry who are forging new paths and developing new strategies to achieve success while providing great outcomes for clients. We welcome your questions, so please type them in at any point during our discussion today in your Q&A box, and we'll be sure to leave time at the end of the discussion to address them. Our Trailblazer today is Ron Mastrogiovanni, Chairman and CEO of HealthView Services. Ron has over 30 years of experience in management consulting, financial services, and information technology. Prior to starting HealthView, Ron co-founded FundQuest, a provider of wealth management solutions for financial institutions, including banks, insurance companies, and brokerage firms. And I think it was one of the first TAMPs on the market way back in, the early 1990s, right, Ron?
Yes, that's correct.
So under his leadership, FundQuest became one of the most successful fee-based money management solutions in the industry. Ron also serves as on the Massachusetts Health Policy Commission, which is an independent state agency that develops and reviews policy to reduce the growth of healthcare expenses and improve the quality of patient care. So welcome, Ron.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being with you and Mark.
Yeah, we're thrilled to have you here. So maybe you can start off by sharing how you initially got into the financial services industry and how you came to start FundQuest and subsequently HealthView Services.
I started in the industry actually on the insurance side. And, started meeting folks and ended up meeting Bob Delco, Chan McVeigh, and we talked about starting FundQuest. The real innovator there was Bob Delco, who really came up with the idea of, wasn't called a TAMP back then, but of performing that type of function. And what we learned real quick, and we applied it at HealthView as well, when you come up with an innovative idea, the usual response is not positive. Right? I can tell you it just isn't. Right? As a matter of fact, if you look at the asset management world back then, and I don't know how much it changed, but you bring up the topic of having these portfolios managed by a third party, and so what does the advisor get paid? And because they get around 50% on life policies, around 10% on annuities. If back then, if they sold a loaded fund, they would get 4.75% on a loaded fund. And if they sold our investment management product, they would get 25 basis points every quarter in arrears. And then the question, who would ever sell this? Right? And look at the world today, right? So it actually did work, but it wasn't overnight, I can tell you that. Right? So you typically get that negative response. So anyways, when we were getting acquired at FundQuest by BNP Paribas, I was looking at what else can I do? I'd like to start something else. And again, I'd like to be innovative. And at the time, I was helping my parents who were in their 80s deal with all the medical issues that older folks deal with, and then had to deal with Medicare. How do you sign up for Medicare? It's not like when you're employed. You have a policy that covers everything, right? Mm-hmm. There, you have a policy that covers hospitalization, another one that covers doctor visits, a third one that covers prescription drugs, and then a fourth one that covers what that doesn't cover. All the others don't cover, right? So you have all this stuff, and you're going crazy trying to figure this out. And I'm saying to myself, I'm supposed to have some level of expertise in retirement planning. I don't know any of this, right? And I said, this is really the opportunity. And guess what? I received the same type of response we got with the money management with this. Now, we are not in the healthcare business. This is not something that we're going to incorporate. But wait a minute, you're not in the housing business. You're not in the transportation business, but we do project those out. Wouldn't it be important to include this as well? And the answer was no initially. But things have changed. Money management or an advisor's role isn't what it used to be. That has totally changed. And now when you look at financial planning and you look at comprehensive planning, this is an important piece of it. Not only healthcare, but also from an actuarial perspective, the question becomes, how do you project real life expectancy? But anyway, so we started this, right? But here's the issue. I had no healthcare experience, no actuarial experience, right? Just like we had no money management experience when we started FundQuest. But you can bring in the experts, and that's exactly what we did, right? So there's George Bernard, there's Dunstan Boxdale, there's Pat Frangolini. There's a whole host of folks that come in with different levels of experience, including Corey Dilengowski, right? So that's the group that comes in that ends up building it out and helping us get there. Because when you handle these startups and the folks are interested in doing a startup, it's never done by one person. It's always a team, right? Right? You can have one person whose name is up there, but the reality is it will not succeed unless the team succeeds. And that's basically what we did. And that's how we started HealthView Services.
Yeah, so you saw a need at the time through your own personal experience, right? But
oh, yeah.
I think that need has only gotten more and more urgent as time has gone on. So if you look at any of the, surveys of people, even younger people, people in their 30s and 40s, nowhere near retirement, their number one concern is meeting their healthcare expenses in retirement.
Yeah, because people today, unlike when we started HealthView, people realize healthcare is not free and it's expensive. And the inflation rate on healthcare far exceeds US CPI. So you're dealing with that compounding on an annual basis. If you take the average person who's planning for retirement, regardless, you can take someone in their 50s, you're looking at $500,000. But the positive side of that is there's something you can do about it today. And what we know is, although that number seems large, the adoption rate of including that in the comprehensive plan and having people take action is very high. And another piece that becomes important is the life expectancy piece. Using real life expectancy numbers that's personalized. So all of this data becomes personalized, whether it's housing, whether it's healthcare, right? All becomes personalized based upon their current situation, the state they live in, and what their needs are.
Those are great points. And Ron, you talked a little bit about sort of the evolution and how managed money back 30 years ago, people weren't really, that wasn't a solution that advisors were bringing to market to their clients. And so, you've seen a lot of changes. And so just curious for our listeners, where do you see kind of where we are now and what are the next couple steps in the evolution of this business?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is the asset management side of it has become a commodity. And the real focus, although people are always looking at what's my performance and all of that, but they're looking at an advisor, and I use the term as a life advisor. They're not just a financial advisor picking stocks. Like years ago, there would be commercials on TV, and I like mentioning the E.F. Hutton commercial. When E.F. Hutton speaks, everybody listens. That's their tagline. You don't see that today. People are interested in the issues that they're facing. And a common one that we run into is that, well, I want to maintain my standard of living in retirement, but I'm still paying off my student loans. and I've got 2 kids that are going to be going to college in a few years. How am I going to get there? How am I going to do that? And how do I handle my 401k? Should I keep it in a traditional? Should I have a portion of it in a Roth 401k? And how does that handle taxes when I'm in retirement as well? So the advisor has to be multidisciplinary. Mm-hmm. And that becomes critically important. The other piece of the change that I see is right now, the average advisor client is over 50% or over the age of 60. And there's a good reason for that. That's where the money is. That's where the boomers are, right?
Sure.
But when you're looking at potentially retiring, selling your book of business and stuff, they're going to look at how many Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, right? How many of them are playing in the game as well? And the trouble is, although the information that we'll be delivering is exactly the same, how we deliver it has to be different based upon whether we're talking to a millennial or a boomer. And unless the industry really takes that into account, you're going to see new firms come up, and you'll have new Amazons, new Apples that are going to end up over time becoming the focus of the industry as the boomers start checking out. Right? So I think that's another important piece.
Yeah. And we had a guest on this podcast a few weeks back that was squarely focused on people who were in their early 50s in some of the situations that you talked about, kids going to school, taking care of parents, maybe legacy student loans. And so, kind of caught in the middle and not having saved a lot for retirement. And I think we've seen lots of advisor practices that have specialized or have a niche in a particular demographic. And it's interesting you bring up the thing about the life coach, because after our session this morning, literally an hour later when I was in LinkedIn, I saw 2 back-to-back posts, that one from an advisor and one from a marketing person who services advisors, talking exactly about that. The role of the advisor as a life coach, which I thought was really interesting given the conversation that we had this morning and that we're having this afternoon.
Yeah, and I think everything, when you look at your life, everything has a financial impact, right? All the decisions you make. So I think what you describe, Ron, is certainly what clients want. They would love to go to somebody who is the go-to person, right? But the advisor's in the conundrum, and you started it, this fee-based business.
Thank you.
Tying their revenue to, the assets under management, right? So it's a badge of honor now. I'm totally independent. I'm fee-based. I don't do commission rule products, that type of thing. But there's, you don't stop working when the market goes down. You may even work more. Mm-hmm. So how do you address that in your, advisory model? How do you address that gap in revenue? And what can you develop from a revenue model that can address the younger generation that has less assets, as well as address the older generation who is calling for more services?
There are a couple of trends that I see, I believe will take place. We've gone through a period of time where basis points on asset management has been declining because it's become a commodity. Things are becoming so sophisticated, and every year we're adding on to that level of sophistication. And today, if I compare what an advisor is generating, call it on an hourly basis, if you want to use that as a term, versus lawyers or an accountant, right? These guys are underpaid. But I'll tell you this, what I believe is we're going to see a trend starting to change, whether it's added on to basis points or additional fees. Given the level of service and the time involved to generate what clients need, financial advisors or life coaches are going to start earning considerably more than what they are today. That's what I believe. The other thing that becomes important is, when we look at this, is to take into account we shouldn't be using generic numbers or national averages. These numbers change drastically based upon someone's life expectancy, based upon conditions they may have, or the state they live in, have significant impacts on the results. And people are looking for personalized type help. Takes more time, right? When you want to do a comprehensive plan, but it makes a big difference. And those are the advisors that are going to succeed. It's not the money management piece. You need the money management piece. I don't want to underplay it. It becomes important. That's what I live, right? But there's so much more to it. It's just a piece of the pie.
It's part of a larger picture, right?
Yeah.
So we've seen some advisors developing models where, it's more like a profession, like an attorney or a physician, where they have fees for services, whether they're subscription fees or, just an annual fee based on the level or the depth of the service on top of the asset management fee. So it's more of a combination model.
Yeah. And by the way, I've talked to clients of advisors, and they don't look at that as a negative. They look at that as a positive because they need that type of help. They want to feel comfortable. And we see those commercials on TV where the 401k type commercial where I don't have to worry because XYZ company is handling that for me, because they're performing those functions that people need, right? And as a matter of fact, I know just using the 401k industry as an example, by personalizing data like this, their participation rates increase and contributions by participants increase. And those contributions increase by a significant number, like 20%. But again, you're talking about a wide range of employees earning anywhere from minimum wage to a CEO. But 20% increases when you have millions of participants, that's a big number.
Yeah.
So that personalization becomes really important. And that's without having an advisor. Can you imagine if the advisor is involved, how much more that is?
And that, what you mentioned in defined contribution plans, so you're talking about participants actually going online and seeing this and somehow it getting distilled, but it forcing them or causing them to act and to do something different, save more often, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
You know what's interesting about that? 401k record keepers have problems getting people to sign on online onto the application. So what they learned is if we offer someone to see what their personal life expectancy is, that creates an attention. People go on to see the number, and they find out there's so much more that they can do there. So how do you attract them to actually go on the site? And having something personal has that type of impact.
Yeah. And that piece of personalization and having reliable data is so important because we integrate your data into Income Conductor, and we see such a vast difference in, healthcare expenses and longevity projections. And with retirement income planning, we often have advisors come to us where they're using these rules of thumb that have been developed in the industry. They run plans assuming that both of the partners in a couple are going to live to age 95 or 100. They're both going to die at that age. Or they're using these national averages of healthcare expenses versus, truly personalizing it to the client. So, what are the impacts of that personalized data on the actual retirement income plan?
When you look at it, historically, advisors would either use 95 or 100 if I went back to the 1990s. Today, it's primarily like a 95. But I'll use healthcare numbers just to give you an example. But remember, healthcare does not include housing, food, transportation, discretionary spending, all of that, right? But just looking at healthcare, if you take a healthy 55-year-old couple, healthy couple, but remember, 50% of adults have at least one chronic condition, right? But let's say this couple is healthy. The life expectancy for the male is 88. The life expectancy for the female is 90. Right? Okay. But what if, as an example, that male happened to have type 2 diabetes, which is pretty common? Mm-hmm. If that person has type 2 diabetes, the life expectancy falls from 88 to 77. Just think of the impact of planning to 95 versus 77, or having a cushion area where you can go up to 82, 83, something like that. But let's look at the difference between 95 and 77 if you're just looking at healthcare. So if he plans to 95, the healthcare cost will be $790,000.
Wow.
That's a big number. If he planned to 77, the number would be $180,000. Again, the power of compounding. Interestingly enough, people think if I have more health conditions, I'm going to be spending more money on healthcare. You will on an annual basis, but from a lifetime perspective, the healthy person takes the big hit. So I've had friends of mine say, so I'm going to drink heavily, and it's okay, right? Which is true, right? So the healthier you are, the more you're going to spend in healthcare. But that's just healthcare. If you look at long-term care, using that as another example, this individual, let's say, lives in Connecticut. And if they're looking at what it would cost this person living to 77. So he has to go into a nursing home. We'll look at skilled nursing. So he would go in typically a year and a half, 2 years before that life expectancy number. And that person will be paying around $350,000+ a year. That's a year, right? And if the person lived in San Antonio, you're looking at around $180,000. So where you live, and by the way, this impacts general healthcare costs as well, right? So not only long-term care. So each metro area has a different inflation rate, right? The states have different inflation rates. All of this comes into play. And on Medicare, there are different parts of Medicare. Some are run by the states. Some are run by the federal government, right? There are all these different things come into play. If you take the healthy female living to 90 in Connecticut, I hate to tell you what this poor woman would have to pay, and that's over $500,000 in LTC, and they typically have to spend 2 years. Those are the numbers historically in long-term care facilities. But that brings up another issue that's really important when you look at income conductor and how to most effectively utilize the tool. If this 55-year-old couple, you're looking at a 13-year difference between the life expectancy of the male and the female. A really critical piece is how do we cover end-of-life costs for the male, but then still have the woman maintain her standard of living until she passes away. And that becomes a really important piece of the whole plan, and not counting about what we want to leave for heirs and things and charities and things like that. All of that has to come into play.
Yeah, and if you don't have those good longevity projections, you're not planning for that survivorship period. And what we're finding with Income Conductor is there are really significantly negative impacts on that surviving spouse that can be handled with good planning. But, if you're not planning for them, they're going to be stuck in higher tax brackets with IRMA surcharges. All of this bad stuff is going to happen on top of them losing their spouse. And that period could be, 14, 15 years that they're living alone.
Exactly. Yeah. Hey, and it also applies when you look at Social Security, right? When you're talking about optimizing Social Security, the key variable in optimizing Social Security is life expectancy. That really drives when you should file. or when a couple should file, at what ages should the male and female file based upon their income and all of that, right? So life expectancy becomes critically important. What's interesting when you look at the numbers we're providing, we use over 500 million claims a year to come up with the numbers on the healthcare and everything else. So this is pretty comprehensive. And at least when clients are working with an advisor, they can use that as a base and then choose something they want to plan to take other things into account as well. But at least we're working from something that's personalized versus just taking the number 95.
Yeah, and what we found is, it's a tough conversation to sit down with people and just off the cuff, talk about how long do you think you're going to live, because that's really the basis of the income plan, right? But if you have reliable, personalized data, it's very easy using that objective number to start the conversation and then take it from there. Maybe, if it's a 77 top of the curve average and the client says, well, I've always had my diabetes under control. Well, then you can talk about longevity risk and you can move that number up higher, right? You can go to 80 or 82, but at least you have objective data, reliable data to start that conversation off with.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. When we first started doing this, one of the big issues that we had to deal with is, so you're going to sit down, have a client sit down with an advisor, and they're going to tell that client you're only going to live another 12 years, 15 years. Yeah. And how is that going to work? Well, we started running focus groups, and what we found was it works in a positive way, right? People are willing to, because if you have a serious chronic condition, you're not living to 95, but you want the plan to apply to you, your family, and you want it all to work. And that's why those numbers, and today we don't have to go in and show them focus group results. Firms know this is important and it's something that should be used because it actually adds to AUM and improves close ratios.
Yeah.
Exactly. And we've heard from advisors saying, those healthcare expenses seem really high. I don't want to shock the client. Well, the client needs to know that information. They want to know that information. And maybe it will result in them saying, well, gee, maybe I'll, work a year or two more. But they're thankful to the advisor for giving them, good, reliable data to make those decisions on.
That's exactly right. As a matter of fact, advisors may take income conductor and that maybe they've been using it historically in the past, and let's say they haven't really addressed healthcare. I strongly recommend going back to your existing client base and presenting that to the client. You will be surprised at the percentage of clients, even though they hear those large numbers, they want to address it. And they want to know how they can effectively handle that. And that's where the advisor comes in to provide the solution. And that solution can be insurance products. It can be traditional asset management products, right? Or some combination of the two so that we actually address the problem.
Speaking of that, Ron, do you, with all of the data that you have and looking through all those claims, do you have a sense for how many of those claims actually are applied to, or maybe the opposite, long-term care insurance? I've heard numbers that are single-digit percentages of people who have long-term care, but in a lot of cases that could be the answer for the skyrocketing costs or the high costs that you talk about.
Yeah, the numbers are broken down not only by long-term care and the different levels of long-term care, but also healthcare by condition. And when I mentioned the 500 million, that's strictly for healthcare, excluding long-term care. Then we have another set of millions of numbers that apply to long-term care as well. And all of that is combined so that when an advisor sees the number, like on long-term care, our numbers are used, and let me tell you something, it helps close long-term care insurance, because when people see these numbers, it's dramatic, and they want to take action, right? And some folks say, no, you know what, I'm not going to need this for another 25, 30 years. I want to go into a regular investment account, okay, or some combination of the two. Other people will buy an annuity with a rider or a life policy with a rider. All of that is available, but at least the advisor is providing the client with actual numbers that are realistic based upon where they expect to be when they retire, whether it's for healthcare and Medicare or long-term care.
Yeah, no, that's important for sure.
So do we have any questions, Mark?
No, we don't have any questions right now.
All right. Well, we're actually over the half hour. So I guess the message here, Ron, is that we should all go out and start drinking and smoking and living it up with our assets right now, right?
Exactly.
Well, seriously, I just want to thank you for all of your contributions to the industry. You're a true trailblazer, and I think what you're doing right now is having a huge positive impact on both advisors and their clients. So thanks so much, Ron, for sharing that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. And actually, the Trailblazers happen to be the team, to be realistic.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us for this webinar series, and be on the lookout for the invitation to our next Trailblazer.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thanks, Ron. Bye-bye.